A little bit of background. I'm going to talk my presentation today. The first thing I'm going to really try to do is provide, first of all, a little bit of background of who we are and what we do as ACCO and as ACCO Sustainable Communities. The next thing I think I really want to talk to you when we talk about getting rural communities involved in major rural investments is first of all to understand who this industry is. If you're sitting here in, in 70 Mile House or Castlegar or wherever, up north, you need to understand who these guys are and what they're looking for as far as looking at community development and what we can do as their roles. The next thing I'd like to talk to you is, well, what is the rural government's role in all this? What should they be doing? How should they get themselves ready? And what process, how they can participate in this process? And then I'll talk a little bit about rural community participation in these different major resource projects. The next thing I want to talk about is a little bit about the joint venture process. If you want to work with industry, there's a kind of a process that you go through and have if you want a joint venture agreement or a 3P agreement, there's kind of a process that you go through. It just doesn't happen all at once. They don't just show up in the door, we sign an agreement 2 weeks later, and we're good to go. So I really want to talk about that and how you can, what the steps in the process are and how that works, and provide some practical examples from ACCO and our joint venture agreements that we have with over 30 First Nation communities and how we've done that, and provide a couple of examples from there. Talk a little bit about, Gordon's asked me to talk a little bit about turning construction camps into community buildings, community housing, and how that can work, because we do have a process for that. So that is actually a benefit for the rural community as you take a look at once the construction is over with. And then overall, the factors for success. So a little bit about who we are as ACCO. We were founded in 1947, and we pioneered modular accommodation design in remote communities. We've done that for many years. Many people will see the trailer we talked about before. I mentioned before with the yellow stripe. Well, that's ACCO. We've taken it beyond that, but that's kind of what we've done for many years. We have a fairly large organization, 9,000 employees worldwide. And last year we had $18 billion worth of assets and $4 billion worth of revenue. So we are a large organization, and in fact, I guess for this group, I represent industry. So I'm the bad guy, and we take a look at that. But I want to tell you how we work with industry, and the tricks on how to do that, what they think about. Our major business lines are utilities, power generation, modular building manufacturing, and construction, which is the line of business that I'm involved with right now. So those are the things that I really want to talk to you about today. A little bit about our Indigenous partnerships as we go forward. ACCO, as I say, has had a long history of partnership with Aboriginal communities right across the country. And we have more than 30 successful joint ventures with Aboriginal communities. And I'll talk about that a little bit. So we have a lot of experience, and we have, mainly it's respect for the people. And I think that's an important part of that. Try to understand, build capacity, and training and development and participating. And just to let you know, Ron Southern, who was one of the founders of our organization way back in 1947, together with his father, is an honorary chief of the Tsuut'ina Nation just outside of Calgary. And his daughter, Nancy Southern, is an honorary chief of the Blood Tribe in southern Alberta. So we do have that long history. And I say we're actually a family-run business, but just a very large family-run business. So ACCO Sustainable Communities is really an engineering, procurement, architectural design, and construction management company. And our mandate is to provide prefabricated buildings, primarily for Aboriginal communities. We engage the community throughout that process, through the planning and construction. We try to engage the community to find out what they want. It's not just that, oh, by the way, here's a design off the shelf, and this is what you're going to want. We're trying to find out what the community wants in terms of buildings, and that's what we can provide training and get them involved. And a lot of it is just simply where if we build a school like we've done in British Columbia, we'll actually basically just transport the units, we manufacture them off-site, we transport them to the site, stack them up like Lego. We get a big crane and just stack them up. Finish them on the outside, put them on a foundation, finish them up, and you would never know that it is actually a modular building, unless there's no yellow stripe on these buildings at all. It's a building that you're going to be quite proud of. So we want to be part of the community, we want it to fit into the community. That's what we're trying to do, and actually show that we can provide the type of buildings that you need to make a community grow. And some of the examples of what we have, just as an example of the type of projects, but it can be indoor soccer facilities, hockey arenas, gymnasiums, community buildings, hospitals, fire stations we've done. These are the things, band offices. So all the types of buildings that you need in a community to make it work, and to have it to be crowd and to establish a community, that's what we can do in a remote location. So that's a little bit of what we're trying to do here today. And just show that it's possible to build these locations in a remote location, in a rural remote location, where otherwise it might be difficult to get that workforce together. So having said a little bit about us, let's talk a little bit about industry. We've talked a lot about today the different organizations, the great discussions on the lobbying efforts, the people that help reflect policies. But who are these industry guys as you sit up there in 70 Mile House? You take, and they're based in Vancouver or Calgary or Toronto. And very much I want to tell you that, coming from industry, I can tell you that they're really very much interested in working with First Nations and rural communities. That is first and foremost. I want to let you know they do want to work with you, and it's very much based, not because they're charitable, not because they're really nice guys, by the way we are, but it's a very pragmatic desire on a part of industry to, with their mandate. They have a mandate consistent with that mandate for growth and increased revenue and increased earnings. That's what companies want to do. That's how they're valued on the Toronto Stock Exchange or the New York Stock Exchange in the United States. And that's what's important to the investors. That's what to take a look. That's what management wants to do. So it's very pragmatic to that. And they really want access, amongst many other things. There's enormous resources within your traditional areas, within your rural communities. So they would like to have access to those resources and to build up earnings. That's what they have in mind when they're doing that. And that can be oil and gas, that can be mining, forestry, fisheries, tourism. There's all sorts of things that they're really taking a look at and looking at for growth. So they have an area that they really want to work with you. And I really want to tell you that companies are really willing to travel the world to get those opportunities, to grow. So they're really willing to travel the world and risk assets to do that, in many strange locations to do that. So we say to ourselves as part of the industry, well, why not right here with First Nations, with rural communities in Canada? And I think that's really the message that they're kind of going through their mind. And as a company like ourselves, if you don't get more hostile to Kandahar in Afghanistan. We do operations there. So it makes a lot more sense to do it in rural BC than Kandahar. So that's really what, it's a very pragmatic thing that you're taking a look at. But I think the message I have is you really got to try to understand things not from how you see industry, how industry sees industry, and understand what they're trying to do. And then you can find out where your common ground is. So that's really an important part of that puzzle. The other thing is we take a look at education and professional development of people in Aboriginal communities and rural communities is going to be really important. As the baby boom generation retires, as we're going to have a shortage of skilled and technical people, so that's going to be an important area that they're going to want to help out with, because it really benefits them in the long term, is having people that can work for them. So another area that they really want to take a look at that. And of course, as the First Nations, as the rural communities increase affluence, there is a market for products, and people will buy more. So again, that's what industry is looking for. So these are very good reasons why First Nations want to deal, why probably industry wants to work with First Nations and rural communities. And it's a very pragmatic thing that they want to do that. Now, having said that, some companies understand this better than others, and some companies are better at it than others. But that's the general idea, and that's what they're taking a look at. So really, as we take a look at industry, they're looking for certain things when they're going to come talk to you in your community, at your First Nation. So they're going to take a look. So what are they going to want to see, and what are they looking for when they look for a good partner? They look for somebody to work with. And I think the primary thing is going to be some evidence of good governance. That you have your act together, that you have, good political structures, you got a good mayor, you got a good council, that people have good controls, and we'll talk about this a little bit more as well. And the important thing is, I always try to suggest to people as we go forward, is a separation from the politics, business from the politics. So you don't need mayor and council, or the chief and council, trying to run the city businesses. They set the policy, and they should step back and let the people that are running the business, let them run the business, albeit with some reporting. So I think that's going to be an important thing, that they don't want to have too much political interference in the business operation, albeit there's going to be some there, but it's an important distinction as you take a look at that. The other thing is they're going to want to do is, of course, they're going to want to expect financial success. That's why we're here. That's why the shareholders invest in our company, and we have to report to them every quarter as to what's going on. So they're going to have some sort of expectation of financial success, and there's nothing wrong with that. Both parties can benefit from that, and that's where the common ground is. And of course, the nice thing is to be welcomed into the community, and that the community wants you there. We want to work together with the community, and we can develop a relationship with that community. So I think that's going to be another thing we take a look at that. And part of that as well is a willingness to build bridges, to work together. And bridges, of course, allow two-way traffic. It allows the businesses to understand the First Nation or the rural community. What are your traditions? What are your values? And what are you trying to do? So you understand that. And many rural people in rural community might have, and First Nations are going to have very good traditions and values. And when you see yourself, you probably never want to live in a big city. But you got to understand who these guys are. And you got to work together, because you may not have that experience dealing with industry. So that takes a little bit of time as well. And you got to be aware that sometimes mistakes are going to happen. And there's going to be some misunderstandings. Well, we all got to try to work through that. And there's got to be a willingness to do that. So this is what the thing is. And it takes some time to do that as we go through. But it is really important to allow that bridge to work both ways. Now, having said that, there's a lot of information on companies. It could be websites are a great place to take a look at it. Google searches, the annual reports. This is ATCO's annual report. There's a whole section that we're dealing with, not only in all our companies, a whole section we deal with in the north, in northern Canada. We also have a whole section on how we deal with Aboriginal partnerships. Annual reports are actually telling you what's really important for the company. So there's a lot of information with there. The annual information form, they can find out all sorts of information on the company, quarterly reports, financial statements. Companies provide a lot of information to their shareholders, as they're required to. Well, you can read that information as well and find out what's important to them as they're in their business, as well as business bureaus, other consumer agencies, other First Nations and communities. If they've dealt, another community that this company's dealt with, go talk to them and find out what these guys are all about. Now, part of what we suggested is there's different roles for people to play. And the rural government has some roles as well. The mayor, the chief and council are providing political governance and set the tone from the top as to what's really important. The strategic plan, the community plan, the economic development master plan. What is your plan for these communities? That's what the political leadership should be providing. Preserve the culture, traditions, and values. Talk about that in terms of First Nations, but there's also traditions and values within the rural communities. With what happens in Nebraska is going to be different from other communities, and Maine and whatnot. So there's different values that we want to preserve within our community and are accountable to the community. Things like an economic development master plan is what you're taking a look at doing. Where do you want to develop and get the highest and best use of your plan? So where do you see your community growing is going to be an important part of what you're doing. So, try to get the highest and best uses of your land, of what you're trying to do. The control environment really reflects the tone set by senior management as to the awareness of controls within the company, and it's really an important part of what companies do. And they kind of look at, the same thing applies to rural governments, the same thing applies to First Nations as what you're doing, because it does form the foundation for all of the components of internal control, providing some discipline and structure as to what you're doing. And then management, as compared to the politics of this, represents that would implement the approved policies and plans. That's their role. So you do have that separation. So when a company deals with you, they'll know that the policies have been approved, and now they can just move forward actually running the business as a business. And maintaining internal controls is also really important for providing reasonable assurance that your financial statements are reasonable and reliable, relevant and reliable. Companies who really think that's important, they value that. Large companies especially, they have to report on that. So they do value that, and they see that in a good partner as well. That's what they're looking for. Now, real community participation can take many forms. As much as direct industry employment, if there's a mine there, you can certainly work for the mine. You can be employed by a local government or a band-owned enterprise that's providing services to that, or provided by a local company that supports the mine. And you can not only, is it just when you think, oh, I'm just working for these companies, but it's a lot of opportunities for entrepreneurs, for people that own companies, to provide that type of service, either on your own, or as I'm going to talk a little bit later, in joint venture with another large company like ourselves, to support that. So that's where you can really provide that as a joint venture to get some of those profits, to keep them in the community. And that's really what you should try to do, is keep those funds in the community and look for that participation as you go forward. So it's really, when we talk about this participation, it's really no different than a large city. It all applies the same way. And what we'll do is we'll actually do an approach when we go into a community, we put in a building, we'll actually look for the availability of qualified tradesmen of the nation or non-qualified people that are looking for training. So that's the same thing, or companies and services that can provide by a nation or a nation's member. So that's create a skills inventory. So that's really one thing you should really look for. Can they do the same thing? That's what we do. That's part of our DNA. That's what we do. Our sisters companies do it when we participate, and I'll get into that in a little bit. And we do it as well. So it's going to be an important part of what you take a look at as we go forward. So I'll talk about this in a little bit as we go forward. Now, as I mentioned, our approach with First Nations, a joint venture process, it doesn't just start with, we come into the community, you sign an agreement, 2 weeks later we sit down with the mayor, the council, the chief, and sit down, oh yeah, we've got everything done. And I don't expect to do that. You don't know who I am. You don't know what my company's all about. So it does take a period of time to really develop that process. And it really starts with an informal discussion. It gets a chance to know you, to talk to you, and to find out what's going on. And then really what happens is it can develop. If you like each other, and what somebody referred to as a scent test. Do you like, does this thing kind of work? Did you have that, you're kind of talking about the same things. Then you can follow up with what we call memorandum of understanding, or I'll call a relationship agreement. And that's going to be the next step. You don't just jump right away into that. And if everything works well, and I'll talk about how this works, then you can progress to a formal or informal joint venture agreement and what we're going to do together. And that takes time. As I say, you have to learn how to walk before you can run. And that's part of the process that you're dealing with companies, and you should try to follow up with that and figure out what's going on. So has anybody actually been involved with a relationship agreement at all? Has anybody heard of that or been discussed with that? And how has that worked?
Well, when we were involved, I thought it worked out very, very well.
Okay.
There was a number of things that had to be surmounted before we could get down to the details. If there's will, there's way.
Yeah.
We can't want
Yeah. I guess you got to kind of do this, just like dating before you get married. You have to, get to know each other a little bit better. So what is a relationship agreement? It's really a commitment by the parties to work together in a cooperative relationship. That's really what it means. You're going to meet together on a regular basis. You're going to have methods to communicate with each other. And you're going to have discussions. And what are you going to meet about? but we can discuss about possible opportunities, joint venture opportunities, and common business interests. And we'll sit down, okay, talk, okay, what do you really want to do? What is your priorities? How can we work together? And that takes a little bit of time to find areas of common interest that we can pursue. And you have a systematic method of communication that's going to really involve workshops, community meetings, career and job fairs, leadership dialogues, and various business opportunities. And the thing about it is, it doesn't really commit you to do anything. You're not going to agree right now. It's just talking about it. You're not committing to actually build a daycare center. You're not going to commit to build workforce housing. You're not working on all the details. You're just starting that process. You have a formal mechanism now to have that approach, to talk to each other and to work through those interests. So that's really what this thing represents and how it works. And really the relationship is also based on mutual recognition and respect. Always an important part of that. And reciprocal consideration. So that if you're dealing with something in my area of business, you'll talk to me. You're not going to go talk to my competitors. We'll work together unless we decide we're not going to work together. But we'll commit to work together. If we're working with you and we're thinking about something, we will work together with you. We will consider what your views are, and we'll always work together with you on these areas of common interest. And we'll talk about that. Share information, and probably the first thing is make sure the staff's available. We'll have regular meetings, but we'll make sure, and you should make sure, that people are available to do this. Because really, you don't want to just let this agreement sit on the shelf and collect dust. You really want to make it work. So you're going to have to take the time and the effort to work through it. And the same thing with a company is make sure that the time and the effort, when you have a steering committee, that we're working together on this. And that's part of the process, and then it'll carry on in place, and it can carry out maybe up to 5 years until it's replaced by a joint venture or a 3P agreement. So this is kind of the stepping stones as we go forward. But it is based on that type of mutual respect. It is based on something that you really want to carry on and continue. So that's really an important part of it until you kind of go forward and replace it and work forward and arrive at something where you have a joint venture or a 3P agreement. Now, as we talk about a joint venture or a 3P agreement, there's a difference, and we should probably make sure we understand what that is. A joint venture really means you have joint ownership of the facilities and rights to the profits from the facilities, of operating the facility. So that's what we're talking about here. One party, and it can be either party, will actually be the ones that operate the facilities, but there will be a joint management committee. And they will actually, the manager will actually report to the joint management committee, which will have representatives from both sides. And they'll keep an eye on what's happening. There'll be reports to the owners as to what's happening. And a lot of times that if you're going to make a significant change to the operation or significant decision, it requires unanimous consent of both parties to do that. So that's part of what a joint venture is and how they work together. A 3P agreement, on the other hand, is basically industry builds, owns, and operates the facilities. They do everything, and it's under a long-term agreement with the government and or the First Nation. So sometimes it's done with roads and sometimes various facilities, but don't worry, we'll take care of this, but here's the bill. And every month you know that bill is going to be there and it's coming. The joint venture, there's advantages and disadvantages doing really what you want to do. But the joint venture, at least you get you involved in the management, and it keeps the profits in the community, and you work together. But it all depends on what people's priorities are and what they want to do. So that's really kind of what the difference is, but that's what that leads to. And I'd say ATCO's had many examples of that. So I'm going to go through an example here as we take a look going forward. But I'm going to talk about the joint venture that ATCO has with the Fort McKay First Nation. Now, the Fort McKay First Nation is located in the banks of the Athabasca River, north of Fort McMurray. It's home to about 700 Dene, Cree, and Métis community members, and really the majority of its operating budget doesn't come from government, doesn't come from ANSI grants or anything else like that. It comes from providing a variety of services to the oil sands industry. So these are people that are really very business savvy, but work with, they get a lot of their revenue, and they're actually getting quite self-sufficient. So this is an example of one of the joint ventures, two of the joint ventures we have with Fort Mackay. And they're 50-50 partnerships. And these Creeper and Lake Lodge and barge landings provide all the comforts of home to oil sand workers. Oil sand workers in Alberta come from all over. A lot of them come from Newfoundland and Labrador and the Maritime provinces and Nova Scotia. But they come from all over. They don't live and work in Fort McMurray. Their families are back home, but they have to have some place to stay. So this is a total between the two buildings, has over 2,200 rooms. So these are providing quite substantial, providing some services under long-term agreements. And basically, Fort Mackay and ATCO, they appointed a board of directors who oversee the operations of what they're doing. Each joint venture is a standalone company that is run quite independently of the First Nation and the company. It's again that separation of politics from the business, and that's what they do. And both joint ventures are very commercially successful in providing what they do. And they have, as they come from home, they have things not only just the room itself and the cafeteria and the food, but they have gymnasiums, they have theaters, they have lounges, so it's all sorts of things. It's actually quite the example. We have the same thing going on in Saskatchewan with George Gordon First Nation, providing service for a mine there as well. So it is possible when you take a look at it, take a look at the opportunities that are going on in your community. Where is that mine development to approach the company? And if you wanted to approach the company with a company, yourselves, the local group, together with a company like ourselves, you provide a credible alternative and credible source of housing for that community. And that's part of the thing you really want to do, is you're not just a small organization, but you can actually do the work. And that's what companies will try to take a look at as well. There's other examples as well. I did a presentation on this with a lady from the Muskogean First Nation, where they have a joint venture in Saskatchewan, where they have a joint venture agreement with the Encanto Potash Mine in Saskatchewan. So again, they did it right with the mining company. So there are examples that companies are actually working together with First Nations, with rural governments, and it's a matter of taking a look at what those opportunities are. Now, one thing that Gordon has asked me to take a look at, and we talked about this, and yes, we have workforce camps, and we take a look at this, and well, how can we arrange this so we can take a workforce camp like this and turn it to this after the construction is gone, and take a look at that. So yes, they come into our community, they've built this thing, and then we get really no benefit. The 2-3 year construction period is over. Well, actually, ATCO has had a large, long history of construction camps and has really developed a process by which you can pre-design construction camp buildings so that they can be disassembled and put together in a community, transported, put together in a community, and actually turn into housing that everybody would be proud of to live in. It doesn't look like a workforce camp, but you have to pre-design. So it is actually quite possible to do that. And another benefit, that especially if you're just doing a short-term workforce camp, the other example is more, as we're talking about here, this is more long-term. But a construction camp, you can actually turn it into something like this, an elder center, or community housing, or houses for people in the northern area. That it is possible to do that. We have done that. And we can do that if people are really interested. We can talk about that, we can talk about me afterwards. It's something we can take a look at doing that. So it is quite possible to do that. And the other thing is, we talked about this, is what about elders' houses as you take a look at these things? Is it possible, it shows this as well, it is actually possible to build these type of buildings for elders' houses in remote areas. Gordon was mentioning to me that a lot of people, especially in northern BC, they've lived in a northern community all their lives and they want to sell their house. They're getting old enough that they want to just sell their house and go to an elder center, maybe in the southern Okanagan, and realize they can't quite afford to do that just because of the differential in housing prices. Well, this shows that it's actually possible to set up elders' houses in a remote area. This is what we do as far as construction. And if you like, there's also possible to operate these things as a joint venture or a 3P partnership, if you're taking a look at doing something like that. There's a need in the community for buildings in remote areas, in rural communities. And this is something that as a ATCO can do, and part of that process that we can do it. So in conclusion, I want to say there's various factors for success that we've talked about here today. What you need is really inspired leadership. You need a mayor, and you need a council, you need a chief in the council that is inspired, that really wants to do things and make a difference for their community. They want to succeed. And that's an important thing, that we want success, and we're going to work very hard for success. You really want to keep the separation of the political structure from the economic development. Yes, the mayor, the chief, and council have got to give marching orders, and there's a certain accountability. But once you've decided the policies, you don't let them do the job. An important part of that. So good governance, dependable partners, and doing your research on partners. And looking at the annual report, looking at what's information out there, doing your planning and doing your homework is an important part of that. And of course, willing to learn and work together. There's got to be that. There's got to be that, and that applies whether you're a First Nation here in BC, whether you're a rural government in northern BC, in rural BC, or whether you're in Maine or Nebraska, wherever it is. All the partners got to be willing to work together. And that applies to any successful enterprise, whether rural or not. So I want to thank you very much for your time and attention. And I don't know if you want to do questions now or just do the other presentation. We'll do presentations later.